Next up, we have Nolan Smith, the edge rusher out of Georgia, who's just a really fun player to watch and an interesting player to evaluate because, unlike some of the other top, defensive ends and outside linebackers in this draft, Smith is a little bit more of a specialist, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean, essentially, he's a flamethrower off the edge and, will get after your quarterback and terrorize tackles with his speed rushes, but at the same time, there are some other areas of his game then almost naturally where he falls short, right? He'll get after you, but then you can kind of get after him as well on the back end. So compared to guys like Will Anderson, Tyree Wilson at the very top of draft boards, I would say he's a little bit less well-rounded than those guys, but at the same time does have an elite level skill similar to those guys, just maybe a few more weaknesses, which we will see as we get into the film here momentarily. As far as some of the intangibles and whatnot, 22 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, 238 pounds, so certainly on the smaller side, but you see it right there, right? That's the big number, the 439, as to why I don't want to say he's in the first round discussion because, frankly, I graded him before the combine and had him, right in this range. But I'd be lying if I said after that number it didn't make you rewatch the film and say, was it really that fast? And in a lot of ways it was, right? In a lot of ways it was. And that's why I call him an absolute flamethrower, but really just a freaky athlete in general. You see it with the jumps. You see it with the 41.5-inch vertical. I mean, what is that? Just absolutely ridiculous, to the point that this is a little bit underwhelming, right? You see those traits, you see the athletic ability, and it didn't always manifest on the field as far as production is concerned. Now, this past year, did miss, couple games there with a torn pectoral muscle, but even prior to that was never necessarily the most productive guy as far as, say, sacks are concerned. Did have a really productive 2021 as far as total tackles are concerned. But yeah, 2022, I would say, underwhelmed a little bit from a statistical standpoint. That said, I brought it up in the Jalen Carter video. I do think a caveat that you have to bring up is just how much talent Georgia has on that front seven. And you might say, well, that means his numbers should be better. And I agree to an extent, but at the same time, they're rotating guys in and out. So even though it says he played 8 games, the snap counts in those 8 games maybe don't compare to what you see elsewhere with some of these other guys. So 8 games, bit of a limited snap count, partially because of how deep their room is there and how flooded with talent that program always is, but secondarily, just because of how early and often they were winning these games and, finish a game by halftime, right? And that's like, well, why do we even trot them out there for the second half? It felt like there was a decent little bit of that, to the point that I'm not extremely worried about those numbers, but it is something to keep in the back of your head. As far as the traits, though, right? We saw some of them at the combine, and we'll just start with that one here as far as the explosiveness and quickness. And again, could just make the whole video clips of him winning with his speed. Can beat you inside, can beat you outside. Like I said, just the epitome of a flamethrower off the edge here. And yeah, I mean, just ridiculous. You try and block him, as a run blocker, beats you inside. You try and cover up the speed rush, he counters back the other way. Then you kind of, play it safer on the inside move and protect against that. And then he's just gonna burn you around the edge. Just so many ways to beat you, simply due to the freakish explosiveness and quickness and lateral agility and all that pent up into one of, I would say, if not the twitchiest athlete in this draft. So really fun just to even watch his get off on the snap. You can see a lot of reps. He's winding up almost, and he's getting ready to burst, and you just know when he's getting a good jump on the ball. As far as flexibility and bend, I gave him one of the highest bend grades in the class. Again, not a lot of clips because, as I said, not a ton of snaps, and that was a little bit of an interesting one where he's bending to the inside in a bit of an unconventional way, but I gave him a very high grade there. 13.75 out of 15. As far as ability to set the edge and anchor, now this is where things start to fall back a little bit. I don't have a ton of negative clips, but as you'll see, not a lot of overwhelming positives either. He is, sub 240 as we saw, and I think he plays. I think he plays with toughness. He's trying his best. Very high motor guys we'll get to in a minute, but I think you want help to his side of the field, particularly when it comes to running the ball, to the point that maybe it's not the most outlandish thing to say that if you draft him, he's probably going to be off the field on 3rd and shorts, and sometimes maybe in first and 10s, right? But otherwise, I know I'm getting a little bit behind here. Hand usage, I thought, was solid, mainly as a supplementary piece to him, beating you around the edge, right? He would kind of use the hands as a counter to the speed. There you kind of see him just winding up on these plays to show off some freaky burst off the ball. As far as the block deconstruction is concerned and playing the run, again, I already kind of mentioned it. Not always pretty against the run, but he's going to work hard, and there has to be something said for that. But at the same time, certainly not nearly as many positives here as some of the other top guys, and I would say he's more of a liability against the run than many of them. To the point, though, that I said he does work hard, very high motor guy. Is not really going to quit on plays, and in fact, I would say he almost gets better the longer reps persist. You can see it there as he chases down Bryce Young. Just a really freakish guy. You listen to his interviews, he clearly loves the game. I would say one of the hardest workers in the draft class, no question. And there you have it again. Just continues to accelerate through the reps, which is, to me, one noticeable difference between, say, his film and, say, a Will Anderson's, right? I kind of brought that up at the end of Will Anderson's video. Well, sometimes I wish he went a little bit harder for longer. That's definitely the furthest from the truth here with Nolan. He's one of the hardest working guys on the field. Lastly here, as you see, finishing and tackling, generally solid. At times I think his size can get him, because he is a smaller guy. It doesn't look as clean as it does with, say, Tyree Wilson, but hey, if you're going to struggle to block him like that, he'll clean you up now. I think at times he can miss some tackles just because of the size, and sometimes he's not getting the best angles. But overall, very, very talented player. Someone that I would say, I don't want to say is a little bit more boom or bust than the top guys, but I think he is because of the specialist nature that I kind of said, right? I imagine there's going to be games where he'll come out and have 2.5 sacks right off the jump, right? Because, there's probably going to be tackles in the NFL, even though the guys are bigger, faster, stronger. They're still not going to compare athletically to Nolan. So I think there's going to be games where he's able to get out in a hurry, be super productive. I also think there's probably going to be games where, you're playing the Tennessee Titans. Derrick Henry's got the ball in his hand, and he's going to run downhill and target Nolan Smith, for 60 minutes, frankly, right? And I think maybe those games will be some of the more negative ones against these run-heavier teams, or particularly when your team is trailing. I think maybe his value goes down a little bit in that regard, and teams are just trying to pound the ball and run the clock. Overall, though, you see it there, 83.35 on the final grade. For me, my first round cutoff is an 82.5, but at the same time, I don't want you to think that that's, that he's barely a first rounder. He certainly is. I'm obviously a bit of a stickler with my grades, but he's tied for my 3rd highest graded edge rusher, defensive end / outside linebacker in the class. I certainly think he's more of an outside linebacker than he is a defensive end. But at the same time, we've seen other teams like, say, Philadelphia take some, track stars and line them up and, just give them that runway in a 3-point stance in a more of a 4-3 alignment. So wouldn't be shocked if a team did want to try and do that. But I do think he's maybe a bit of a more natural fit as a stand-up 3-4 outside linebacker. As far as a team fit is concerned, he's an interesting guy because I've seen a lot of people have him go anywhere as high as 6 to Detroit, and I've seen people have him go, into the late teens, early 20s. Almost where Detroit picks for their second time, right? I think he'll be off the board between there, I would say. There is a lot of talk about Philly potentially going back to the well as far as defensive linemen are concerned. And I keep hearing Lucas Van Ness in that regard. I think they'd be more interested in Nolan, straight up, than a guy like Van Ness, just because of the freakiness on Nolan's end. And when you add that to the room, similar to what they did with Sweat and kind of what you saw with Hassan Reddick this past season, I think Nolan would be absolutely electric there in maybe a little bit more of a limited role off the bat, but then that can kind of expand as he continues to improve, hopefully, some of the other areas of his game and become a little bit more well-rounded. Otherwise, really just pick your poison, right? I don't think there's a team in the league who couldn't use a Nolan Smith. Everyone could use a lightning rod off the edge like that. But yeah, whether it's, I think 6 is a little bit early, personally. I think the top 10, I've seen a little bit of Atlanta at 8. I could see it. I don't frankly hate it, right? I imagine some people would start calling out, the Vic Beasley comparisons in that regard. And I don't mean that as a slight to Vic. Vic was a very good player early in his career, and I think there maybe are some similarities there just in terms of how they're going to beat you as a player, but I just think Nolan's a flat-out better athlete. So I would say really, I could see 8th overall. I could see 10th overall. I wouldn't be shocked if he continued dropping much more than that, if a team maybe moved up to, say, 15 or 14 to try and grab him. Because I do imagine, again, there's teams that are falling in love with him, even just behind the scenes, right? Because of the interviews and the football character and, battling back from a torn pectoral muscle as fast as he has, right? There's just a lot of positives with Nolan. And in that regard, yeah, I have him. I'm graded in the first. Overall, I guess I can tell you how it breaks down because I realize the 83.35 doesn't look maybe the most impressive, but if we sort by all players and see where I have them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, tied for 9th, 10th, right? So, again, I think that, there's maybe not quite as many first-round graded guys in this class than we typically see, but I think in that regard you kind of adjust upward for that, and there you have Nolan for me sort of in the teens-ish, right? Because those guys I haven't graded. I didn't get to O-line as much as I would have liked. I think you guys get the point. Fun player. As long as the main three defensive linemen I would say are off the board, I think he's probably fair game. Otherwise, once Tyree, Will, and Jalen find their home. So with that said, that is pretty much all I have for you guys in this one. Let me know down in the comment section down below what you think as far as your team likely getting Nolan Smith. Do you feel good about the selection? How does he line up with your roster? And do you like who you took him over, right? Because there is some talent up here. Just because I say there's 16 first-round grades for me doesn't mean that there's not a lot of players that I like at a variety of positions. Especially defensive end. Defensive end is one of the deepest in the draft. So in that regard, would you have rather taken someone else and found a D end later, right? Tell me all that fun stuff down below, and I'll be curious to see what you guys have to say in the comment section. So with that said, all I got for you guys in this one, I'm mic'd up, now I'm mic'ing out. Peace, guys. I will see you next time.